Laura Foster is with me at the Frederick Remington Art Museum in
Ogdensburg, New York.
Thank you so much. I understand that you are curating a large exhibition today.
Yes, we are opening today the 2013 Members Juried Art Exhibit. It's a way that we thank our members who are artists. We have 44 participants in this show, which includes 49 works. And the member artists are from Canada and New York State and across the U.S. all the way to California.
Exciting.
It's a great way for us to keep, this museum is a shrine to the great American artist Frederick Remington. We have the Artist's Widows collection with the largest collection of his paintings, drawings, sculptures, and archival materials. But he died in 1909, and it's great to get living artists in here for our visitors to enjoy their work, and today especially for them to meet each other, see the work, and also to see them taking in the collection, the artwork by Frederick Remington.
And this museum turns 90 years.
Yes.
This year.
We were founded by Mrs. Remington's will. We opened our doors on July 19th, 1923.
Great. I'm going to follow you inside, and perhaps you can give us a tour.
Very good.
Thank you.
The house itself is over 200 years old, but the renovation you're about to see dates to 1897. You can see we've got this enormous Dutch door and this oak-lined lobby, which makes an excellent reception space for our visitors. Frederick Remington never lived in this house, but he was from the area, and his widow lived in this house from 1915 to 1918 and left her collection to found the museum.
Very generous.
Yes, we're very lucky.
Yes.
Frederick Remington, we are glad to say, had no siblings and no children.
So everything
we
is
are,
left.
the museum is the legacy. Well, it's not quite everything, most of the things from the estate are here, but Remington was a very successful artist from his earliest days. He died at 48 and had produced over 3,000 signed paintings and drawings. He did 22 different subjects as bronze sculptures and wrote fiction and non-fiction amounting to about 8 books.
Is that him?
That is a portrait of Frederick Remington done by a Morristown, New York painter named Charles Chapman. It is anachronistic. This was painted in 1961. Remington died in 1909. And the paintings that are represented behind him are, of course, from a much later time in Remington's life than the way he appears in the painting.
Great.
So we'll turn the corner here and you'll see the Bronco Buster, which is certainly the most iconic of Remington works. In his time, it was somewhat representative of the untamed excitement of the magical, mythological period of the Old West. Remington he was not the first sculptor to raise a horse's front legs in the air, but he really made it his own by instilling a huge sense of excitement and vigor and action, motion into his sculptures.
It's an amazing sculpture. Yes. Which way?
This way. Remington was born near here in Canton, New York. He's buried there. His subject matter was mostly the Old West. He did plenty of Canadian work and over to Europe and Russia. But many summers he came back to the Thousand Islands and right here in Ogdensburg and Canton to recharge his batteries with the wilderness. He had an island at Chippewa Bay in the Thousand Islands. He could easily take the train from New York City and have a very productive and pleasant summer experience, bringing folks with him from his life in the city.
How long have you been with the museum?
I came here in 1989, so that's almost 24 years.
So you're almost part of the legacy.
Yes, I'm almost one of the antiques.
No.
I think for the purposes of the video, I won't go into detail about the many artifacts that we show in this corridor.
We can just walk.
And we'll walk and you can get a sense of it.
Yes.
And we'll walk to where the artwork is shown.
Sure.
So in the Mrs. Remington's gift, we have letters, Remington's working materials, the sketches that he made, the photographs that he bought and took, some of his working tools, and we use those to help tell his stories to our visitors.
So what is the main, that's him?
Yes, that's him.
A life-size?
A life-size, well, maybe bigger. He's not quite on the floor there. He was 5'8", and his largest was 300 pounds.
Oh.
Oh. So
Big
it's
guy.
funny because if you look at this picture, he looks like a New York City businessman, which in many ways he was. But in his own time, and certainly now, people know his art so well, and they imagine him to be the cavalryman or the cowboy that he depicted so many times in his artwork. But it's not. It's a false assumption.
Amazing.
So this is the Albert P. Newell Gallery. We built it in an expansion in 1997. And here we house most of the masterwork paintings and many of the bronzes in our collection. Many of these works are from the last decade of Remington's life, and they reflect a more mature impressionist painting style. He made his fame as an illustrator for the great magazines of the day in New York, like Harper's, Collier's, Scribner's, Outing. He was a very, very busy, productive illustrator before he made the leap into 3 dimensions with sculpture in 1895.
What made him decide to shift from two-dimensional artwork to three-dimensional?
Well, Remington always was seeking to improve his work and to conquer new self-appointed goals. You can see from the earliest days of his work in illustration that he didn't quite have the technique down, the draftsmanship to show a human body anatomically properly. There were a lot of awkward things and a real fastidious control of the most finite details, which in a way made sense for reproduction as illustrations in a magazine. But in 1895, one of his neighbors in New Rochelle was a sculptor named Frederick Ruckstall. And in a famous story, Remington went over to see, what was going on. And their mutual friend, Augustus Thomas, who was a playwright, said, Fred, you really see things in 3 dimensions. And Remington reportedly went to work and worked for about a year before he copyrighted his first sculpture, which is an earlier version of the Bronco Buster that we just saw.
And the themes are mostly lots of horses.
He loved horses. Of course, he was born in 1861, so during his life, it was an everyday part of life. And Remington did love the horse. He was very careful to show horses that were very appropriate for what they were doing. For instance, in this bronze right here, this is Polo. This is one of 2 casts in the world. And these horses belong to rich men, and they have beautiful brushed coats. They have wonderful physiques. You can see in the finest detail, even he's created the blood vessels showing under the skin. And the men are equally well groomed. And if you step a few paces over, you'll see a cast of a very different subject. This is called the Cheyenne, referring to the Indian, and his plains pony, who is not well brushed, who has a very different physique, and shows the effects of a very different life. And Remington was celebrated and took great pride in his depictions of and enjoyment of horses. And often the people that went along in his artwork were not so much individual portraits of real people, but were often kind of he had armies of kind of stereotyped people. The trapper, the frontiersman, the cow puncher, the cavalry officer, you know, kind of based on the assumptions and ideals of the time.
Being such a heavy man, did he ride a horse?
He did ride a horse. I think it was harder as he got bigger. I think he always had some struggles with food. He died from a burst appendix, and I think he was used to a certain level of dyspepsia, and he didn't really know what was happening to him until it was far too late.
Which way?
Oh, which way? I'm going to show you another sculpture here. This one is called the Rattlesnake, and this one is on loan to us from a private collector who earlier had it on loan to the White House. It was on display through President Reagan and the first Bush administrations in the Oval Office. And you can see here, using the lost wax bronze casting method, how diverse the textures are. He's made such wonderful texture in these bare skin chaps. You really lose the sense that this is just a piece of metal. You sense the different materials, the cowboy's vest here and the way it wrinkles as he moves. The belt is flung out from the body as the horse and the man jolt away from that rattlesnake. It's one of Remington's masterwork sculptures.
He was a very good observer.
He was a very good observer, and he really loved his work.
There's 2 here, I see.
Yes, the one that you are now looking at is one that was cast for this collection by order of Mrs. Remington's will. It's number 100. It lacks the very sharp detail and the full sense of motion that the first one had, because the artist's hand was not involved in the casting of the sculpture. They were cast at Roman Bronze Works in New York. We're very glad to have it, by the way. It was the only rattlesnake we ever exhibited for the history of the museum until a few years ago, when Dr. Monk put the other rattlesnake on loan to us.
So his sculptures are mostly here or spread all over U.S.?
Oh, his sculptures and his art, all his artwork, there's a lot more of it elsewhere than exists here. What we have is the largest collection overall. Since Remington was such a very successful artist, he sold most of his work. And the sculptures were made in a series with his ongoing participation according to demand. And we have books on all of this. We published a book which we just reprinted last year called Icons of the West, Frederick Remington's Sculpture by Michael Greenbaum, which is an ultimate Remington sculpture Bible. We also have a wonderful color catalog of our collection, and the shop sells a fantastic book called the Frederick Remington Catalog Raisonné, which is an illustrated list of over 3,000 paintings and drawings. Okay. I want to show you this painting. It's called The Sentinel. It's a classic Remington painting from his last years. It was done in 1907, and you can see that it's lit by moonlight, not by the sun. There were about 61 nocturnes. This was a way that he was making a big progress in his artistic development just before he died. These paintings were honored by a major exhibit at the National Gallery of Art in Washington several years ago. So Remington loved to take a moment, not necessarily the moment of peak action, a moment where the viewer is able to think about what has just happened, tell themselves the story based on what they see, and what might happen. So our sentinel here is clearly on guard by his title. He's there with a gun. He's keeping watch in front of this wagon. And Remington has just barely suggested, oh, look, there's another wagon next to it. And if you look deep through that keyhole, you can see maybe this is a big wagon train circled up for the night, and he is on duty. But the human eye can't see the much for color when in the absence of light, or much light. And Remington very artfully chose palettes for these various nocturne paintings to convey mood, to help send the message to the viewer. And you think this is green, or shades of green, and you look a little closer, and he's brought out the lovely reds in these wagon wheels, and a little in the man's trousers, and that wonderful scarf, in a way that would never appear but in the real world. And it's so luminous. Look at the way the cover on that wagon almost shines. The whole thing is improbably illuminated. And those stars would not be yellow and even red like they are, but it works. To show white light would ruin the painting.
Beautiful contrast.
Mm-hmm. And over here, these paintings, Remington did almost all of his work in the studio in a controlled environment where he had all of the best tools in order to make the finest finished paintings. Remington paintings are often found to be in very good condition because he took great care. These 4 paintings on this wall are Canadian pictures that Remington did in his last summer at a private hunting club called the Pontiac Club on the Ottawa River north of Algonquin. And these are beautiful, impressionist landscape paintings. And we love to show them to the Remington enthusiasts who come here on pilgrimage, because there's all this wonderful, just plain American Impressionist painting that the cowboy lovers don't expect, because Remington is so much more than his subject matter.
I was wondering, why did he choose Canadian landscapes?
He loved the northern woodland summers, and he loved Canada. Canada, of course, was much closer then in some ways because the border was not enforced the way it is now. Not that he would have trouble getting there now, but it was one of his beloved places. He took moose hunting trips in Quebec and he went all the way out west. He did articles on the rebuilding of the railroad far west. He was, Canada, so much of the culture 100 years ago was so similar. It was every bit as attractive to him as the American frontier.
Amazing.
So the title of this is simply Canada, based on the inscription that Remington put.
How nice of him. Pontiac, I know this place.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.